My name is Andre Dukes, again, Collaboration Director of Early Childhood at the Northside Achievement Zone. The Northside Achievement Zone is really attempting to end multi-generational poverty using education as a lever. We are taking a two-generation approach, working with both parents and scholars to provide supports prenatally through high school with the idea that all children will be ready for kindergarten. We also engage children or parents in something that we have called Family Academy, which is a series of parent education courses that we are offering. So we are talking a lot about development, particularly in our College Bound Babies program, which is focused on parents with 0 to 3. And that's where we are really emphasizing the importance of parent interaction. And so one of my mantras is that every interaction counts. We say this a lot with parents, and I think the research and the evidence that we have heard today really supports that. And so I won't say a whole lot about the work that we are doing, but just know we believe that it's important that all children have access to quality 4-star rated programs. So we are offering scholarships and partnering with Think Small to make sure that scholars have that access in North Minneapolis. We also focus on developmental screening and making sure that children are on track for kindergarten readiness. And as well, we are making sure, again, that parents are getting tools to help their children be on the track to kindergarten readiness through our parent education courses, but also making sure that the staff that are supporting children are really supporting them in a parallel process. So what parents are working on, or what children are learning, parents are also learning how to support that development. So I think that's what I want to say about NAS at this point, and I'll allow Scott now to introduce himself.
Good morning. I'm a professor of educational psychology at the University of Minnesota across the river here. And I had either the fortune or the misfortune to grow up in an academic culture where research really happened in community settings, not on campus settings as much. So for the time I've been at the university, most of the work that I've done has been in communities. I spend about half of my time, the university has an office in North Minneapolis called the Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center, where the intent is to be more focused on community needs and to bring research to bear on those community needs. I've had the good fortune to work with Andre and his colleagues at NAS for a while. And I think that if I had to describe our research generally, it's primarily focused on preschool age kids. And what we try to do is to marry scientific rigor and relevance. And I'll talk more about relevance, I think, as we go through today. I think the reason I'm here is that for the last couple of years, we've been working with a series of school districts around the Twin Cities to implement a program called Lena Start. It's a early language development program for children who are 6 to 42 months of age. We've done it here in Minnesota through the early childhood family ed programs that are in those districts. Other places are doing it through hospitals or through libraries. It's a 13-week standardized program for families that focuses primarily on parent behavior to change child language outcomes. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Lena Start when we get to it. Well, it's your job. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
So VIP Mina, Thao, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Mina Thao. I like to say I'm a mother of 4. I just started working with Way to Grow for about 3 months now, but I have been a parent or a client with Way to Grow for about 4 years.
That is wonderful. So can you tell us a little bit about what you will be doing in your new role at Way to Grow?
Okay, so my role with Way to Grow is I'm a family educator. So we do home visits, and I like to say I do quality over quantity. It doesn't matter how many home visits I have. It's how much time I spent with that kid and that parent. So what I do is I go to home and I empower the parents. I tell them that I'm not your child's teacher. You are your child's teacher, and I'm here to help, and I'm here to guide you to, what I think is the right direction. I know you know, but sometimes everybody needs a little help.
You are absolutely right. And I think that really highlights the importance of parent leadership. versus parent engagement. When we think about innovation, that is one of the things that sticks out to me a lot. The innovation in parent engagement is moving towards an idea of parent leadership, and the evidence of hiring parents from the community or from our programs is evidence of that. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we all have heard from Dr. Cameron. So is there anything that you want to tell us more about yourself?
I think I'll say that working for kids, I showed you a few of the materials that we've developed, but we're really working with groups to develop materials that translate the science best to the groups that you want to translate to. So I showed you some retractable posters for home visitors. We have a home visitors toolkit that allows you to talk about the brain and just carry it in a canvas bag with a magnetic board, and you can put that up and talk to people about, let them build brain circuits. We're doing a lot of work now with teenage brain development and developing lessons that can be implemented in school systems that will help kids have a fun way to develop decision-making skills and impulse control skills, those difficult items to get a teen to do enough that they'll build really strong brain pathways for that. So we're always looking for ideas of what the community could use, and let us know what you need, and we will get a team of scientists working on it.
Absolutely. And I love this poster. I would love to have one myself.
You can.
Talk about, thank you. I want one. We do talk about brain development, and what I do is I use Alan Schroof's depiction of the tree as a way to describe brain development. And I have to say, I do talk about the amygdala, and so, but parents seem to resonate with that a lot once they see, and understand pathways in the brain and how they are created, and then just how that impacts our ability to regulate our emotions, and we can then talk about the amygdala. Having those tangible representations are really helpful for parents as well. And so, I talked about my mantra of, every interaction counts with parents. Scott, tell us what settings, services, messages seem to resonate most with the families that you work with?
So I'm going to start by stepping back for just a moment, if that's okay, and echo two things that we heard earlier this morning. The first one, Stephanie Carlson talked about individual differences in variability, and particularly the economists in the room, but all of us who are researchers, we love variability because that means there's stuff to figure out, right? That's what we're about, figuring stuff out. And then Judy talked about pruning. The idea is that we have a lot and that we're going to kind of thin back to the stuff that really matters. So what I want to do is to be, one more economics term, disruption. I want to be just a little tiny bit disruptive and to promote pruning, I hope. And that is that I want to distinguish between what we do and why we do it. Because I think it's a really important distinction in how we engage parents. Some colleagues of mine at the university, recently published a paper where they looked at, in an experimental study, teachers' judgments of the credibility of arguments about educational interventions under three conditions: a description of the educational intervention, a description of the educational intervention with a verbal statement of the neuroscience substrates of it, a description of the intervention with the verbal description with a picture of a brain. Guess what? That third explanation, people found the argument much more credible. However, so I think that's a way to bring people in. I worry a little bit that it's a way about snagging people rather than sustaining people. So my experience has been with parents that what we find to be most engaging to them after trust, after sort of trustworthiness, is vividness. We want to tell them things that they say, oh yeah, I can see that, I can touch that, I can feel that. One of the features of Lena Start that's been most powerful is that the parents, so Lena is a small electronic recorder that the child wears for the course of a day, and then there's a fancy set of software that unpacks that recording and turns it into scores of how much child-parent interaction happened, how much child talk happened, how much electronic noise there was. It gives parents this sort of hour-by-hour report of what their sonic or language environment looked like. The parents love it. They love it. they'll sit and we talk about privacy and what we tell you is just for you and you don't have to share it with anybody else. They're immediately saying, how'd you do that? How'd you do that thing right there? What they like is for us to bring all of these complex ideas into their lives. And so whether it's the pathways with yarn, or us giving them very specific links to the things that we're talking about and how they show up in their everyday lives when we're not there, has been my experience to be a really powerful sort of engagement tactic.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that we do is really start with what parents are already doing, like talking to their children, playing with their children, but then giving them or scaffolding additional skills that they can use to help promote brain development. And so I think that is another great way of doing that. So Mina, can you tell us a little bit about the messages and services that are offered at Way to Grow that you think resonate with parents? And being a parent that has benefited from that program, what are some of the things that really stood out for you?
What stood out for me was having somebody that looks like me coming to my house makes me feel like I'm comfortable enough to open up. Just listening to me, encouraging me, even though I tell myself, I'm doing the wrong things. I'm not such a good parent. That's what you think when somebody else comes into your house. You think about, somebody's come into my house to teach me how to teach my own kids. That's kind of what I feel right when Way to Grow came in. But after a while, what happened to me was we had a loss 10 days after Way to Grow entered my house. So I didn't want to listen to anybody. I totally forgot how important education was for my 3-year-old at that time. I kind of completely shut myself away from everybody and my son. And then it was a good thing that my family educator came into my house. It was kind of like a wake-up call. I remember she coming in and, she listened. She didn't stop me and tell me, I don't want to listen to what you're sharing. So she listened through all the hard times that I have. One thing that stood out for me was she mentioned to me how important education was. She mentioned to me that, life is hard and, but education is also very important. And she told me that, hey, we have, I think at that time, Way to Grow have a type of assessment that she brings into the house, and she assessed my son. And she was able to tell me that, he's a little bit behind for his age, and, we need to continue working on this. So, and then that was my wake-up call, too. And she told me, and one thing she said to me was, she said that, it's okay to cry and miss the one that's not here, but you have to remember the one that is still here. So that's when it hit me. I thought to myself that, I was so selfish. I thought about only myself. And I didn't remember my child. And looking at his score, he was behind. And I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe, it takes more than a village to raise a child. That's when I finally realized, okay, I need help. So she coming in, I think it was once every 2 weeks. Yes, once every 2 weeks she comes in. And I think by the end of the summer, by the end of the summer and going into the time they go back to school, she told me, hey, maybe we can register your son up for preschool Pal. So I said, okay. I was kind of, I was like, no, I don't want to. I'm kind of nervous, I was overprotective. So I keep saying, no. And she keeps saying, hey, he's, how do you feel about him? And I told her, he don't know his number. He doesn't know, his letters. He's very aggressive. He was the only child, and he was, to me, he was very mean. So she said, our teacher's really good with that. That's what they do, and that's their job. Trust me, you're gonna like it. So I decided to try. And yes, by the end of his preschool year, he was academically very good. He went to kindergarten, and we got a lot of, just words from his kindergarten teacher. They're just like, wow, he's so good at what he's doing. What school did you guys went to? And I was so proud of Way to Grow. and I tell my parents, I tell people I know, now that I work with Way to Grow, I don't know what to say to other parents other than, you have to try to believe it. My word and my experience with it, it's not gonna buy you into getting into Way to Grow, but Way to Grow is it affects me personally, and it has affected my family. It was a very nice program. It helped me from, prenatal through my birth, and even through my child going to school, and even now. I work for Way to Grow, so I use the skill that I learned from Way to Grow, and I apply it to me in general with my son. Just empower of me being able to, what type of question to ask for conference. Me being a parent and not literally have no education. I'm just like, okay, what should I ask? What shouldn't I ask? What is an important question to ask? What should I know? What should I not know? Way to Grow walk you through all of that. But now talking of Way to Grow, we work with mothers that are pregnant, so prenatal through 3rd grade, so about 8 years old. We just expand to Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. So we work in Minneapolis and Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. What else? We just launched in a new curriculum called Parents as Teacher. And it's a very good program. But like I mentioned, Way to Grow was already a good program before Parents as Teacher came into Way to Grow, or before we took the curriculum of Parents as Teacher.
That is wonderful. And let me just tell you, she didn't know if she had anything to say when she got up here. But once you just start, you can't stop, right? Give her a nice hand, everyone.
Thank you.
What a powerful story. And what I hear in what you're saying is the importance of practitioners really being listeners and learners in the beginning, and then just walking alongside of you to give you the support that you need until you can do things for yourself, right?
Yes.
Because you have the capacity to be able to do what you need to do. But sometimes life, gets in the way, and you just need someone to help you reframe
Yes.
what you are going through. And that's what helps, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story, and I know it was very personal. Thank you for being vulnerable as well.
Yes.
Dr. Cameron, I just want you to talk a little bit about the services that you feel are important for families. Something you said yesterday, though, that really stood out to me was the fact that, one of the greatest contributors to cognitive development and social emotional development is sleep. And that's something that, we just don't talk to parents about. What are some other things that you think of that we really should, some messages, some services that we should be offering to parents as well?
I think that Working for Kids has been particularly concerned that parents actually interact with children, that they spend time doing things with children and encouraging children to learn new abilities. I think nowadays it is really easy to, if you want a child to learn something like how to read or how to do anything, how to do math, to give them materials. It can be an electronic tablet that will really preoccupy them, but not interact with them. And we think that it's just incredibly important to keep in place that adult interaction with children. And so everything that we have done has tried to encourage people to interact more. Working for Kids, once we really realized that parent interaction in the communities we were working in was not as good as it could be, we developed a game called First Pathways Game, of course, to represent your first brain pathways. And it's available for free. We started using it as a card deck with little activities that parents could do with children that were age appropriate and didn't require any purchased material. But then surprisingly, when we would, the home visitor would show a card to a parent, the parent would say, well, I don't know how to do that activity with my child. So for a baby, 0 to 6 months old, one of the activities was smile at your child, make faces. And so to hear that a parent wasn't sure what you meant by that, I was surprised. But then when we started digging into that a little, we realized that many of the parents we were working with didn't have good parenting themselves. And so they didn't have a role model. And so we now have little video clips that are like 30 seconds. And You can just look at it on your phone. Again, the game is for free, so the parent can access it and look on their phone, see what it's like, and almost always what they say is, "Oh, no big deal. I can do that." And that's exactly what you want. You want to empower them to be able to interact with their child and realize that they are very capable and that it's going to have a huge influence on their child to have that interaction with the parent. So I think parent interaction is really important.
Yeah, and the innovation comes in when parents don't have certain things. There are other ways that they can still scaffold the skills.
Right.
But it is just, helping them understand how they can use the environment as an education.
And everything they have around the house, that they don't need special materials in order for their children to develop sturdy brain pathways.
Absolutely. And there are some things that present themselves as barriers for families to be able to effectively engage in parenting programs. And Dr. McConnell, I know you and I have worked many years, and we instituted the Lena program, and there's some challenges with us using that Lena device, particularly going into early learning centers and getting the permissions to be able to have the device on the scholar. What are some other barriers that you think are representative for families that are trying to go into programs?
It's a really important question. The answer will sound simple and straightforward at first, but stick with me for a sec. At the simplest, it's about access and cost and benefit, right? Can I get there? Is it worth my time? Do I feel like I and my family benefit from it? I think one of the things that I've discovered, that I think I've learned a lot from my NAS colleagues, is that those three things are not just geography and cost-benefit analyses. The access part is about trust. I was talking with Daniel earlier about Andre's role and my role, Mina's role and my role. I'm an old white man. I am not the recruiter for a program that's going to serve families, really young families, period, right? But certainly families of color. I'm probably not, on face, bad pun, a trusted sort of messenger about that. So the first thing we have to do is to think about how to make these programs accessible, meaning that I'm willing to walk through the door. We've had, as I mentioned, we've done a lot of work recently with school districts, and we've heard from families that they too had poor experiences in school and were a little bit sort of reluctant to go into a school building to get this support for their families, no matter how good it sounded before they got to the school. So how we think about how we position, how we offer, where, when these programs are, I think is a really, really key feature. Cost is another one. Cost is one where I think that parenting and language interventions and interacting with kids is really, really, really important. It's at the top of my list. That doesn't mean it's the top of everybody's list, right? It may be that there are other issues about a broken car, about the potential of losing my housing, about any number of issues that may compete with my attention to parenting my child. That's a real factor for these families. So how I think about, how I as a developer, as an offerer of programs, think about reducing essentially the costs of leaving aside those other issues is critical. I have to be able to think about that for families to be willing to come, to show up. And then I think benefit is the third one, that there has to be, believe me, I wish that this were true. I wish that I could tell them this is good for you and that would mean something. But in fact, they get to vote, right? And so I have to be able to offer something that in every shape and form has benefit to the family, that they see it as worthwhile for them to engage in. We all will exert greater cost for higher benefit. So if I can ramp up the benefit, maybe I can kind of reduce my attention to those costs. But I think across those three things, that we have to offer programs that families are willing to come to, able to come to, and see value in coming to.
Right. And I would add one more. Those are all great. I think another thing that, we run the risk of as practitioners is othering families, and I think that is another barrier. But we have to recognize that the families are our families, our mothers, our aunties, our sisters, our brothers and uncles, and not get into, you know, this mindset that I'm here to change or to help or to do for, and that's the othering piece, but that families really have the capacity and the tools that they need to do for themselves.
Can I just add one piece real
Absolutely.
fast? So you might remember Judy Cameron's slide where she had the two, I don't remember the two kids' names, but the three trajectories of parent talking. And I think the important thing for all of us that I think we all remember that when we talk about working from a family's strengths is that even the bottom trajectory wasn't zero, right? Even the bottom trajectory was not no talking. It was talking. It was engagement. There were things going on. There were perhaps not as many things or not as diverse or not as rich of things as we might want, but there were things going on. It's hard. I don't know that I've met a family where I'd say, yeah, forget it. It's not worth it. It's going to be hard sometimes, but there's always love of child, engagement with the child, hope for the future. Those are all things that families bring to almost any task, almost every day. And so if we can somehow find ways to work from that spot and to help them strengthen things that they already have, I think it's not only a much more pleasant way to talk with people, it's probably a much more effective way to work with people.
Yeah, and I love that piece about just loving on kids. You know, we should be able to just love on them, and that has a lot of benefits on their development, love. So, Mina, give me two things that you see as barriers as a parent to accessing programs.
Let me see.
Just two now.
Two things that I see that are barriers for parents,
Barriers,
right?
yeah.
I'm trying to think of my experience. I think I want to say getting there is very hard for some parents with multiple kids, and you know, I think some with just one kid is hard. Transportation is hard. I think I like to say colors, because there's so many people of colors now, and you know, if they look different from you, you don't feel that comfortable telling them what is going on with your, you know, in your family. So I think, you know, having somebody that looks like you, you know, understand your culture, or not just look like you, but to understand your culture, makes you feel more confident in telling them what's going on in your family, knowing that they won't judge you.
Absolutely.
So those are some barriers that I could think of that I have experienced. I can't think of anything else.
No, that's really good. And, you know, what all of this suggests to me is that there are things that programs can do, and they don't cost a lot of money. Transportation doesn't cost a lot of money. We provide cab services, you know, for families within the Northside, and it's not a huge expense. But also that whole piece around cultural relevance and making sure that our staff reflects the communities that we serve, helps families to feel more comfortable in accessing. These are things that we can do. So the thought that, you know, it's so hard, there's nothing that we can do is far from true. There are a lot of things that we can do to really be family-ready environments, right? And so we really think about how can families be ready to enter into our programs, but how can programs be ready to receive our families, right? And so, Dr. Cameron, I'm going to kind of shift a little bit and ask you to tell us a little bit about policy and some of the things that we might be able to consider as we think about innovation in parent engagement. What would you highlight as promising practices for policymakers and practitioners to consider adopting?
I think in the policy world, we've done a pretty good job at the policy level. So at the legislative level, there's been recognition that there needs to be access for everybody to programs that will work for young children. So we have Head Start, we have early Head Start in many, many states in the country now. We have subsidized care very early on if you can't afford that. What I see that we kind of ignore, and I think states ignore it because it's just too overwhelming to consider it, is that when you're out in the community, many of the people that we teach using Working for Kids don't access any of those resources. They're afraid to access those resources. They may not be paying their bills. They may be doing other things that they don't want to bring attention to themselves. And so because of that, they don't access any of the resources that are put in place. And I think that we're just, turning a blind eye to that and saying, okay, we're doing pretty well as a state. We're passing legislation that puts things in place for a large number of people. And we fail to recognize that the people who need the resources the very most are the least likely to be getting them. And I'm just, in many ways, appalled by the educated people's behavior to say, okay, we can only do what we can do. We can't deal with that because they don't want to come forward. They're afraid that if they come forward for some resources, somebody's going to catch them doing something else. That may be the worry of the adult, but who's suffering? That little child is suffering. The child is not getting access to resources, access to the experiences that will build sturdy brain pathways. And the parent loves the child very much, but is afraid to let that happen. So I think as a society, we need to think about that issue. I don't have the resolution to it, but I certainly see it.
Well, and just as a follow-up, you make me think about parents who are afraid to really display their own well-being. They may be having challenges with depression or mental health. How would you offer or suggest that we address those kinds of issues?
I'm glad you asked that. So I have been giving training sessions for mothers who have babies that are born addicted to drugs. And so the baby on the first day of life is undergoing what we call acute withdrawal syndrome. And this is a very, very common occurrence nowadays. So the mother was addicted to drugs during the pregnancy. And so the baby's not only born, it's born and undergoing withdrawal. And they're in a hospital setting, and so I've been invited in to see if we could work with them to think of this program. And I show them results. Again, we try to use tools that are accessible to everybody and say, the drug exposure of the baby during development is one thing, but it's little in comparison to a much bigger problem that you can do something about. If you stay addicted to drugs, then you're going to be craving the drug. You're going to be preoccupied with your own problems, and you won't be paying as much attention to your child, and your child needs you there. And so we try to help them learn strategies they can use for that. And I'll give you one example. One mother who we met at a session like this, I saw her again for other reasons. She happened to show up in a session a year later. And she explained to me that she had not beat the drug addiction, but she didn't take drugs in the morning before the kids got up. She got her older kids up, got them dressed, put them on the school bus, took the baby to a child care, then she took drugs. But she stopped taking them before the kids got home. And, you haven't solved the problem there. But those kids are doing much, much better. And when you said love, we should be allowed to love, I just was like, this is phenomenal love. We might criticize a person like that because they aren't doing things the way we would advise. But that is really compelling love. And I think it really goes to say that using brain pathways and, giving kids the support they need to use those brain pathways is important, and everybody can do that. They might do it in their own way, but they can all do it.
Exactly. And I think that, just to piggyback, I think about being present and the importance of caregivers being present in the lives of children. And when we talk about being present, that it is about that interaction. It is about our self-awareness and taking care of our own wellness so that we are present for our children, and just how important that is for a child's development. And so I always think about ways, and we talk about ways that parents can use mindfulness techniques and other techniques to just make sure that they are always being present with their children, and that's so important.
To add one little thing to that, working for kids was trying to get that concept across that you need to take care of yourself, and kids need to take care of themselves too. And we got advice from Frameworks Institute in Washington, D.C., who thinks about how to translate words to get meaning across to the public. And they said, Judy, try using the word charging stations. Even the poorest people have cell phones, and they know their phone won't work unless it's charged. So people understand that concept. So we just have a picture that we put up on a poster of a wall outlet. And we talk about, as a parent, what's your charging station? When you feel just exhausted and fed up and you can't handle it anymore, some people have a person as a charging station, some people take their dog for a walk, and there's no end to what you hear when you have people reflect on their charging station. You move from that to getting them to think about, what is their child's charging station? Children need charging stations. And you can go from that to one of those multi-outlet bars because that's a community charging station. You plug in lots of cell phones, lots of people get services. So many of our community services, the ones we're talking about right here, are charging stations for people. And that has been a wonderful way to talk about it that people resonate with. So I recommend it to you.
Absolutely, and staff as well. So it's important for staff to find charging stations as well.
And that it's okay to need a charging station.
Absolutely. Dr. McConnell, get in on this.
So I want to comment on the policy question and seize this moment. Dr. Kashkari, I wrote this down when he was talking earlier this morning. He said to us, are we making the difference we seek to make? Right? So we're all in the hot seat on this one. I know there are some elected officials in the room. I know there are a lot of advocates. I know there are a ton of smart people. What I want you to notice is that the trajectories that we saw in Stephanie and Judy's presentation started very early, in some cases before children were born. I want you to think about where we, as a culture, meet kids. Before they're 3, we primarily meet them at the pediatrician's office. What we're talking about are community-wide efforts. We have great models. We have NAS, we have the St. Paul Promise neighborhood that I think have demonstrated to us that if we can take a comprehensive, wraparound, preventive, upstream focus, that we can start to make a real difference. How are we going to make a difference for the kids that don't have the benefit of living in NAS's or St. Paul's Promise neighborhoods? How can we coordinate across what are now both thin and disconnected service delivery systems? When a pediatrician sees a child and knows that that child has a language delay, what do? I'm concerned that they too often do almost nothing. Maybe give them 2 books instead of 1 book. That's a good thing. It's just probably not sufficient. So I think we have in front of us, both here in Minnesota and across the country, a real opportunity, and go back to that admonishment, probably an obligation, to think about how we start to do things as simple as data sharing, as complicated as coordinated care systems, so that we're finding families that need a little bit of help and giving them a little bit of help. And we're finding families that need a lot of help and we're giving them a lot of help. And we're doing it when they need the help, not when they finally have a child who's old enough that we meet them. So my wonder is, we as a room and our friends and our colleagues, if we can start to think about how to better knit together the service delivery systems, both formal and informal, that we have in our state, and leverage those so that we start making a bigger difference in the way that somebody was talking about earlier, I think it was you, Judy, that's basically not as expensive, that we would be able to say, hey, Andre, I met that family, you should go talk to them, right? That's, at a policy level, I think something that we need to be able to find.
Yeah, and I see Senator or Representative Pinto here. Good to see you. He's doing such great work. And you mentioned the issue of scale. So at a policy level, what are some things that, you know, some specific policies that you feel we need to be supporting? Are there any that you can?
That's a great opportunity. Wait, I didn't write that one down. So I think, there's been a lot of effort to trying to increase formally our screening efforts. I think that's a really good place to start. It's a detection part, right? You can't solve a problem if you don't know that it exists. How we think about screening both earlier in children's lives, formally across their years, and then what we do with that information I think is really key. Some of you know Dana Susskind and John List at the University of Chicago. They've been working on a community-wide approach to public health that includes things like language development. And they've had a real question about sort of where the leadership for that community level comprehensive effort ought to be. I think that's another part, how we think about systems. In special education, we've solved this problem by appointing agencies that are the lead agencies, but not the sole agencies. I'm not sure I know what that looks like for preschoolers or for infants and toddlers and their families, but I think having a lead organization that's charged with figuring out how to connect dots when we see them is another part. There are probably some expansion of services that are going to be needed. That probably means more money. But I think at the outset, just figuring out how to take advantage of what we already have is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, and the issue of money always comes up. But you know, if we think about everything that's happening across our state, there's some money somewhere. And
I think it's downstairs.
I talk to Art all the time. I don't want to get Art started, but you know, we can find the money, but it is about making children and families a priority. And it is really how do we help policymakers and legislators really, you know, and our community make families and children a priority. And when we think about community, and Mina, I want to get you in on this as well. How do you see the community supporting families? What does that mean to you?
It means a lot because it's, you know, I'm going to come back to raising a kid alone is hard. You will need extra help. And, you know, any help that you can get. And, you know, sometimes it's, how do I say this? Sometimes it's because you don't know the resource. You know, you can't find out. I don't know how I don't know about it, honestly, until I met my family educator, you know. So sometimes I think you need somebody else to help you, you know, to encourage you or to give you information. You know, sometimes it's social media, sometimes it's just word of mouth, and it's very important. And when I say community, I see a community as one, if that makes sense. Because if, you know, how I say this, if my child is behind, it may be my child who's behind, but not just only my child, everybody else or other people's other child is behind as well. So when you work together, I feel like if my kid get it, then maybe some kids will get it. If my kid doesn't, somebody else's kids wouldn't too. And sometimes I like to say, even if it means you're doing the thing alone and you're standing alone, somebody can feel comfortable enough to stand up and follow after, and you're gonna get somewhere. Yeah. And one thing my husband always said to me is, you know, when you're comfortable, you're not growing. Right. So, you know, you have to be uncomfortable. So I took that and really, you know, like, because I mean, I was a stay-at-home mom, so I was really comfortable. And he told me, you know, it's good that you're comfortable, but you have to get uncomfortable, you know, that's when you're growing. I thought about it and I was like, hey, you know, maybe that's true.
Exactly. And I think that is so important because when we talk about scale, there's the high game and then there's the on the ground game at the community level. And certainly there's things that the community can be doing to bring this work to scale as well. And I think what you are demonstrating just in being here today is the way that we scale is to really empower parents. Yes. And give them the tools that they need and help them to create their own leadership around yes. their home, around their community, and with a particular focus on their children as well. So thank you so much. I think we are ready to move to questions from the audience. There's a hand up already.
Or answers.
Yeah, right. Help us.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say that this is a clinic on how to do a panel discussion. It's really been incredibly interesting and well organized. I'm an economist in a business school, and one of my colleagues in marketing told me that they are doing a special issue in the Journal of Marketing Research, which is the premier journal in that area, on education. And they were asking me what would I say to them about what topics they should address. And the discussion that you've all been doing strikes to me, the latter part especially, very relevant to this issue. It's how to get out there, and so I'm actually have a couple of questions. One, is there research in the education realm that actually addresses this issue of, we'll call it marketing? I know you all are individually experts, and so the other part of my question is to sort of free ride on your knowledge and ask you what I should tell them.
Who would like to answer that question?
I don't know anything about marketing, but I'm a professor, so I'll answer the question. So I have this wonder about whether we, as a community, could identify some very small number of measures that we could report regularly to a community about how things are going. And whether that, in and of itself, can be, it's probably not the answer, right? It's probably part of it, but many of you know Pat Fallon, actually it's Fred Sen, Pat Fallon too, but Fred Sen once said to me about helping providers do a better job. He said, tell them they're doing a great job and then show them a graph, right? We're doing a great job. This is Minnesota. We love our kids. We're all of those jokes that we say are I think speak truth. And yet we're not doing a great job, right? So how do we take our commitment, our obligation, our hope, and do better? And I wonder if giving people very clear, very simple information about it's getting better, oops, it's not getting better yet, would be a way to help make that happen.
Yes.
Good morning. Laura LaCroix DeLune. I just wanted to comment on the policy conversation that was there. I think we know what we can do and what can help. I think we need to have the public will to do that and move forward, especially as we think about the prenatal to 3 space. It's space we haven't typically come together around and paid for. But I will say that we know when families have access to high-quality home visiting services, when families can have that targeted response, as well as high-quality infant and toddler care, we can make a huge difference. And we see those results. They stay with kids and they stay with families. We know if we provide these services to families who have needs, similar to families that have the means to pay for them on their own, we can eliminate gaps. We choose not to do this. It's a choice that we make, and I think we need to really stand up for what we know works. We are really picking and choosing which kids can be successful and which kids cannot. And until we start facing that truth ourselves, we're going to continue to see these gaps in Minnesota. So I think it's time we stand up and do what we know is right for kids. There's economic arguments that we can make in this behalf. We spend it early, and we get the returns later. So I think it's important to recognize that, and then also, if I can applaud Mina for actually mentioning the fact that we need providers to reflect the communities that we serve. And we need to stop in Minnesota saying, I can't recruit people of color to work in my program. We have to figure out ways to actually bring people from the community and move them into these positions and get that upward mobility. So I do think we know what those policy solutions are, and there's a number of people working on them. And so I just want to call us to task and say, today's research is great. We have the economic arguments, and I know we're going to talk more about it later, but as the panels move forward, thinking about how do we actually come together around some of these ideas that work.
I want to very much respect that comment. I think a lot of what we've talked about today reflects that. I mean, I think we know a lot. We've known a lot. Some of the research you pointed to was from the 1990s. The Perry study goes way back. We've known a lot of this for a long time, and that comment is very on point, that we need to act on what we already know. I take that. At the same time, the title of this conference is Innovation, and we have 2 academics and 2 practitioners all involved in cutting-edge work. So I just want to ask you, on top of what we've kind of known for a long time and haven't sufficiently acted on, what are you as practitioners and scientists seeing in the last 5 or 10 years that you would point to as innovations, new things that, will help us act, new things we need to know as we act? What are the real innovations that we can layer on top of the stuff that, we're already way too late in acting on?
I can start. So I'll give you a really simple answer. I'm in Pittsburg, which is in Allegheny County, and Allegheny County's been very, very worried about this issue. And to get to your comment, really trying to empower people who need help and need resources to be advocates within their own community. How do you get people to be better advocates for themselves? And so they have a launch program. Launch is a federal program, and many states have launch programs that are trying to improve mental health well-being in children 0 to 8. And that program put a lot of resources into having discussions with their community about what their communities felt they needed, and then starting to provide some of those tools. So a really simple tool that seems like it is having a big effect is a little key ring that has a set of cards attached to it. And the cards are just resources that the communities felt they really needed to know about. And now when home visitors go out, they leave this little key ring with people. And then those people can be the leaders in their community. They have the resource right there. For innovation, it's simple. It's not electronic. It's not sophisticated. But it is getting in a readily accessible place the resources the community themselves felt were important, and then empowering the people that are in the community to be the resource that everybody goes to. And it really seems to be taking off. So I think that is a very cool innovation.
Absolutely. I can piggyback on that, and just the work that we're doing with NAS is really at the systems level, trying to develop coordinated systems of support where organizations are working together rather than in silos, doing shared fundraising, having shared measurements, shared language. We just instituted a shared measurement across our early childhood collaborative. And so agencies in the past have been using different tools and developmental assessment tools. So we just moved to a universal tool that we are hoping will be able to demonstrate efficacy across our collaborative. And so I think that that is going to be helpful in terms of the work that we are trying to do. So I think just in terms of innovation, that's one to speak to. Do you want to add
I got
anything?
2 sort of research and development innovations that I want to add. I love this. The last mile is an enormous issue for us, right? So a key ring that has cards on it is gorgeous. I just think that's a great idea. Way upstream from that, two things. Moore's Law. So technology is opening doors that never existed for us. I described a few minutes ago the Lena device. It's a little gizmo that actually could be much smaller than it is today. It's about the size of a small box of matches. What it allows us to do is to effortlessly follow kids through their lives and tell how their lives are going. That is the technology behind that, and the way in which it represents emerging technology, I think is a giant step forward for us as researchers, and all of the other technology supports that go behind it. So social media, machine learning, all of the things that we can do because of Moore's Law that allow us to do better things faster and cheaper, I think is a really important part of us figuring out new things to bring to this innovation space. The second one that I would add, though, is that I think as researchers, we need to innovate how we innovate as well. So we need to do a better job of more quickly identifying community needs, figuring out how to fix them. RCTs take a really, really, really long time. So are there ways that we can identify faster A/B testing kinds of models that allow us to perhaps identify smaller tactics, but tactics that are really, really useful? And then the third part is figuring out this dissemination part, that we need to figure out how to get our lights out from under bushels. We need to figure out what the trusted messengers are, what those messages look like, how we deliver things in ways that people can use them. So both expanding our capacity to find things and to share things, and then being able to innovate more quickly and share the results of those innovations.
And in terms of technology, I see your art. Want to mention Think Small has a texting app
Right.
that they are distributing or helping to incorporate across centers. Fabulous technology tool, sends text messages to families, gives them tips on what they can do with their children to help in development. And so that is something that I just wanted to lift
But I
up.
need to tell you an example of this. So I have friends at the University of Kansas who have taken that and have added geocoding to life. So now when you walk into the grocery store, you get ideas about what to do with your kid at the grocery store. How cool is that?
Art, you have the last word here.
I just want to get back to the question of how we market these ideas and some success that Rob and I have had, and this is what I would tell you on the marketing aspect. So we want people to think about early childhood development as economic development. And when you think about it that way, the business community starts to listen. And we've had a lot of success, especially here in Minnesota, on getting the business community to supporting high-quality early childhood education for our most at-risk children. What we call the Minnesota Model for Early Learning, which is parent mentors starting prenatal, along with an early learning scholarship. Because of the business community, because of that way of marketing, this is our future workforce. This is critical to economic growth. We're up to $70 million now annually for our early learning scholarships and mentor program. I'm not saying it's the only way to market it. There's always the moral argument. But this economic argument has worked, and it hasn't just worked in Minnesota. There's an organization called Ready Nation, which is a global organization now, and it has something like 2,000 business leaders around the country and now internationally supporting these kind of programs. So that's one lens, if you will, that we've shown has a lot of success. And ultimately, with all the innovation done, with all this research, without the funding, we're going to be here 5 years from now talking about the same problems and the same gaps. So ultimately, it's about getting funding and empowering the parents. And we have found the political aspects of this, if you've got the business community behind you, not only can you build stadiums, but now you can invest in kids.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of this esteemed panel, I want to thank Rob for inviting us, and thank you all for participating today in this discussion. Let's give it up for this wonderful panel.